Support comes from UT's Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center, featuring miles of trails and nearly 900 native plant species. More about the official Botanic Garden of Texas at wildflower.org.
Hey there! To prune or not to prune? Now that's the question I know everybody's asking, coming in faster than the latest cold front. So let's snip some advice with Julie Clark, founder of All Women Stronger Than Dirt Garden Maintenance. Hello, Julie.
Hey, John Hart. Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, look, we've got tons of questions and opinions about what and when to prune. And our Texas weather, as we all know right now, is always a roller coaster, but it seems like it's on steroids at the moment. Yeah. But, this year's been extremely dramatic. How's that going to guide our decisions this time of year?
Believe it or not, even with the crazy extremes that we're having, we still are keeping our same approach. I think that for hardy perennials, native woody plants, you can still cut back now to get the garden cleaned up and take this opportunity to make some space and be able to reassess the garden. Where anything that has more tenderness, tropicals, subtropicals, anything like that, we're leaving until probably second week of March. Okay. That'll allow us to get past, theoretically, our last freeze date, which the Farmer's Almanac is saying this year is going to be March 1st, but I don't trust it until the 15th, really. You know, after South by Southwest, then I feel comfortable.
Let's dive into some of the specifics. So subtropicals, some people have, I'm not expert in these by any means. I probably have already killed mine. What are we looking at doing right now?
Things like Pride of Barbados or yellow bells, stuff like that. Generally those are going to go all the way down to the crown of the plant. You can cut those down now, but other subtropicals like, cannas or large bulbs, things like that, I would leave those until March. And that way, then you cut them back after all the freezes are done. You get a little bit of protection from the existing leaves if the plant kind of, freezes down, collapses on itself. That little bit of leaf cover can help to just keep the crown just a touch warmer. Anything that you're thinking is going to maybe be tender, I just leave until early March and then look at the damage that it's sustained over the winter and then prune from there for shape and the size that you want it. But that way you don't have to go back and do it twice.
Well, what about evergreen or semi-evergreens, native and naturalized? What about those guys?
So that's the most of the plants that we tend to have here in town and in Central Texas in general. And those you can follow your regular procedure with those. We cut back right now. We take advantage of this time where there's winter weeds that we're working on, but there's a lull with other activities. So we cut everything back now. So things like Salvia greggis, other salvias, little woody things like skullcap, Turk's cap, some of the larger ones, Copper Canyon daisy, all those kinds of things. We cut those back now. If you've got large plants like lantanas or Turk's cap and things like that, we cut those back to about 8 to 12 inches. For the smaller ones like skull caps, we cut those back to anywhere between 2 and 4 inches.
And that was my question was, I know a lot of people are, especially if they're just getting into gardening, they're really worried about damaging the plant and they don't want to cut it back. But actually, if you don't cut it back enough, it gets really leggy.
Yes.
And some of those plants, they're really nice when they're a bit more compact. You can get a better display. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And it's important to understand the function of pruning in that.
Right.
When you prune, you generally encourage new growth and you encourage denser growth. So that's helpful to the plants. And
then what about moving plants right now? I mean, stuff's going dormant. Or maybe it doesn't know what it's doing because it's either 20 degrees or 80 degrees. So it's probably confused right now. But for the ones that have just said, we're out of here, what are we doing with moving plants right now?
In general, it's a great time to move plants. The temperatures are overall cooler And the plants can use this time to establish a strong root run before the heat hits again. One real important caveat to that is make sure and water regularly, just like you would if you were moving them in March or April. Don't get fooled by the cooler temperatures. Those roots need consistent moisture to get really established.
Again, another curveball we're getting is with La Nina, it's pretty dry right now when it should be getting some rain. So you really want to make sure that if you're moving them, you're giving a little bit of love.
Yeah, and in general, I know everybody likes to cut back on the water, especially City of Austin does its winter water thing, but it is important to give the plants at least some regular water to keep those roots insulated, especially if we get a big freeze.
People just get into gardening think, oh, don't put water because I put water and it freezes, I'm going to get frozen plants, but that's actually not the case, right?
Yeah, you don't want it sprinkling directly on the plants the night of a freeze, but it's really important to water your plants before a freeze because that moist soil, water insulates better and freezes, a little lower than air. So it's important to get those roots protected. Okay,
what about cleaning our pruners or our loppers or whatnot? I mean, why is that important?
The main thing is that they're going to be dull. You've got a lot of the plants have resin, and you want to keep that cleaned off your pruners because it just dulls them and makes them less effective. And when your tools are less effective, then you have to work a lot harder to get the job done. So I recommend clean your tools before you start in on a lot of pruning. And frankly, clean them at the end of it. That way, they're not sitting there with any moisture on them, which can invite rust or any of the other junk that gets on them. And then they're ready for you the next time.
Really, what is the purpose of pruning? I mean, some might think, oh, you're just really bored because nothing's actively growing this time of year. You're just dying to do something. Help guide us. What's our purpose of pruning?
Well, that could be part of it, but so. The purpose for winter cutbacks, the way we do it is for one thing to clean up the winter garden. For us, we do all of our composting and mulching in general before the spring hits. And it's a lot easier to get your compost and your mulch laid down when you don't have to add spoonfuls of mulch around big plants. If everything's cut back and you've got the crowns of the plants cleaned out and leaves and other debris raked up, you're clearing away old, potentially disease-ridden stuff in the garden, giving it a fresh start, and making way for composting and mulching. The plants themselves benefit because they're going to focus on root production for the most part anyway in the winter.
Right.
It just takes off a little bit of the tops, especially for those plants that go dormant, that they're not doing anything anyway. Another thing is that winter pruning gives you an opportunity to look at the bones of the garden. My forsythia sage ended up being a thicket this year, and I just don't want it to be that much, or my sedges just went bonkers and I've got too many and I don't see any plant definition anymore. So it's an opportunity to look at it when they're cut back, and given that it's a good time to move things, you can really see clearly that, what plants you might want to move to another area of the garden. So winter cutbacks are helpful in that way. Also, you get to see what your skeleton is of your garden. If you've got rock work, you get to enjoy that rock work. And some of the gardens are, it's just a nice breathing time for us. If you're doing regular seasonal pruning, and also something that is called regenerative pruning, we kind of combine regenerative pruning with our regular throughout the year pruning. Regenerative pruning restores a not productive plant into a productive state. So that can mean cutting off thick canes, old stems of the plants, and getting them into a better place where they're growing off of younger shoots that will have more greenery, have more potential to bloom. So we do that kind of clearing as part of our winter cutbacks. So for example, if we take a Salvia greggii, which is a really common plant, we cut those back to anywhere between 8 and 12 inches, and then we remove any wood all the way down to the bottom of the plant that's pencil thick or thicker. That makes more room for light and air to get into the crown of the plant, and helps the younger stems be more productive, and overall just gives the plant a better look once it starts putting on the growth in the spring.
I know with the Salvia greggii and some of those, what if somebody's looking there and saying, okay, I'm listening to what Julie's saying, I'm going to prune, but this plant still has some green leaves on it.
Yeah.
I'm not going to touch it. I'm going to hear it say, ouch.
I know. It's so hard, but it's like a haircut, and we actually use a lot of haircut terminology when we're doing our pruning. For a salvia gregae or any other plant, you do those cuts, and it sends the growth hormone down to the secondary shoots. When the growth hormone starts surging back up into the plant, if you've pruned off that top primary shoot, then you've got all the lateral shoots coming off of that, and you're going to get a much bushier, fuller plant as a result, because all the side shoots are going to be putting on greenery as well. And you can even be really vigorous with the way you cut. Grab a handful of it and put your pruners right in there and cut that handful. You don't need to be too picky about things. It's a bit more of a hack and slash operation if you're doing winter cutbacks.
And then grasses, you see different maintenance companies doing different things, but what are we looking at generally to do some pruning on those guys?
So grasses are an interesting one. If you've got a really natural garden, a very relaxed kind of style, then the blooms on the grasses are wonderful to leave right now,
Right.
and that's the case for some of the perennials as well. So you could leave that stuff, but then the grasses really need to be raked out thoroughly at the beginning of the spring to dethatch them, get all that dead material out. And then if you need to just do a few snips on the bloom stalk, you don't want to cut the large ornamental grasses back too late if you're going to cut them, because then the new growth has already started because of our wildly varying temperatures over the winter. We cut native grasses back, all of them except for Mexican feathergrass, which we do not cut back ever.
Okay.
But all of the other ones like Gulf Muley and Lindheimer Muley and the Miscanthus, we cut those back to somewhere around 12 inches right now, and then we rake them out to get all that dead growth out, again, for light and air, and you'll get better growth in the springtime as a result.
I tend to wait towards March, like you've said, because there's habitat value. I like to have some little overwintering structure. I like the texture of the grasses when they're dormant, but I like to have some overwintering structure for insects and nesting material for birds. So I tend to wait a little bit, but hey, some people like to clean them up. So there's no really wrong or right. It's what you're feeling.
Your aesthetic goals in your garden are a big part of that. And that applies to pretty much all the plants. We as a company, we don't have the opportunity to wait until March to do everybody's cutbacks because it's too busy, because we're trying to do too much other stuff.
Right.
But as a home gardener, you absolutely can have that discretion and keep that winter garden until March if you want.
I love it. Winter garden. What about evergreen shrubs?
Evergreen shrubs, things like yopons and boxwoods, bottle brush, viburnum, any of that stuff. We leave all of that stuff until March. I like to take a look at what the damage is, and then do our cutbacks based off of what we need to get rid of because of damaged material, and also then assess it for the size that it's functioning in. That's an important consideration, is if it starts out and it's already hanging over your sidewalk in March, then you probably want to cut it back a little harder than you would if it's securely in its space in March and has room to grow and will be in good place in July.
Right.
So things like Cinizos, same thing. I do cut those back quite hard at times. Cinizos can take it even well into the thicker wood. They generally will resprout if you cut them back kind of hard in the spring. It's a little bit of a shock the way it looks, but if you want to refresh a really tired, worn out shrub, that often works. I mean, not every time. Every once in a while, they'll give up the ghost, but the vast majority of the time, they're fine.
And then what about trees?
Shade trees are, out of my wheelhouse, and I refer to the experts for that, with the obvious good times to prune live oak trees, which is important to follow. Now is a good time, and then the heat of the summer is a good time, but definitely not in the spring. Now for ornamental trees, things like Anacacho orchids, huisach, any of the other many native ornamental trees, I wait on those until March. Again, same reason as with the shrubs. You can go ahead and tidy up your crepe myrtles now. Once they get big enough to where we can't really reach the seed pods, we don't worry about trimming them. For small ones, we'll cut those seed pods off. In general, those smaller ornamental trees, I like to wait until March and prune them right before or right as the new growth is coming on, because then we can shape them. We can see what's dead, we can clear that out, and we can establish a nice shape for the year for those trees.
Just to wrap all this up, tools for the job. So if I'm going to prune, besides buying a beaver or something like that, what do I need to look at?
So there's 3 main tools, really, I guess 4 if you want to add a saw, but your first line of defense is always your hand pruners. Okay. And these are my trusty Felcos, which are quite well worn and not the cleanest at the moment because I've just been using them. Didn't follow my own advice and clean them after the fact.
We're calling you out right now, Julie.
That's right. So hand pruners is the first thing. If you're pruning something and you're straining your hand, go get a pair of loppers. Don't fill your hand to keep using pruners. Go get another tool. And loppers are long-handled pruners like this. Right. And they're good for much thicker things. You know, you can get up to a couple of inches for sure with some shrubs. Now, if you have really hard wood, you may have to shift to a saw once you get thick, but it just depends on the plant. For grasses, we like to use shears. Okay. Shears have a longer blade, and we find that doing grass cutbacks is helpful to use with shears and a partner. That way you can have one person holding the grass tight and another person coming in with the shears to cut. If you don't have a partner, you can use your pruners for grasses, or you can wrap bungee cords around your large clumping grasses and then use the shears on them by yourself. So that's another good method.
Well, Julie, I want to thank you so much again. Really appreciate all your advice on this. Again, it's a crazy time of year, and any guidance is greatly accepted. So thank you so much for sharing your time with us today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, John Hart.